So I'll be presenting on, I'll be addressing the acceptability of eco-art and environmental art in art museum exhibits. So museums in all fields are already adopting excellent greening procedures. So this is usually in the architecture, so in relation to energy usage and construction materials and things like that. But how much are museums looking at eco-art as a tool for education about sustainability in their actual exhibits? So I have two sets of questions, questions for art museums and questions for the eco-artists for how they can work successfully together, things for them to consider. So the questions for, yes, questions for art museums. Do we consider the cultural and political heart of eco-art? Is the outdoor site of a project preventing its inclusion in an exhibit? And if so, can the exhibit documentation and reenactment? And is the environment one part of an upcoming exhibit's topic? And then the questions for artists. Are we flexible in adapting our project to different locations, including art museums? And if our work is conceptual, are we focusing enough on powerful and understandable evocative communication? And will our art have a long-term effect, and will it evoke change? So starting with the first question for art museums, do we consider the cultural and political heart of eco-art? So a lot of the time this has to do with funding. This is at the Tate. This is a live woman. It's part of a protest, so she's had molasses poured over her by two other protesters from pouring it from containers that were labeled BP oil. So this was to draw attention to the financial connections between BP oil and the Tate. So some eco-artists will not want to be associated with a museum like the Tate who has financial ties to a company that's bad for the environment. VW is another one of these. VW has sponsored eco-art shows, and they're currently sponsoring the climate change conference in Paris right now. And so some eco-artists think this is hypocritical, and they think this is just a PR move on the part of VW. So here are two truth in advertising ads or billboards that are in Paris right now from the UK-based art collective Brandalism. So we're sorry that we got caught, and drive cleaner, or just pretend to. Second question for art museums, is the outdoor side of a project preventing its inclusion in an exhibit, and if so, can we include documentation and reenactment instead? So this is Revival Field by Melchin. This was a bioremediation piece. So Melchin used metal leaching plants to detoxify a hazardous waste dump. This was in Minnesota. So then here's his original drawn plan for this, and so although the project was out in the environment, you can still have something like this drawn plan in a museum. And so this piece is actually in the permanent collection in the Walker Art Museum. And then this is a model of a scale model of the same piece, and this was included in a retrospective of his recently in Houston. So again, it's the documentation. This is another project in Melchin's, Operation Pater. This was in response to contaminated soil in New Orleans, lead contamination in New Orleans. And he had children from the community illustrate $100 bills. And then he's going to present these to Congress and ask to exchange them for the real funds and the real money it would take to clean up the lead contamination in the soil. So even though this project took place in neighborhoods, you can still exhibit this in a museum setting. And the vault door in the background was the front door for the headquarters of this project, in like a small house in a neighborhood, but with this really large vault door. So they brought that into the museum. So those were examples of documentation, and then this is an example of reenactment. So Taiwanese artists helped the Taiwanese Amish tribe rebuild their homes after there had been encroachment on their community from urban development. And then the artists brought this project to an art museum where they reenacted it by building a model house and inviting the tribal chief and some members of that community to come and talk about it and raise public awareness. So it reached a broader audience by being shared in the museum as well as having, taken place in the real world. And then the last question for art museums, is the environment one part of an upcoming exhibit's topic? So is it even just one part? So here's an example from the Smithsonian's Museum of African Art. They organized the show Earth Matters, and the broad topic was land, so they included both traditional art and contemporary art. So by nature, this was going to include some eco-art or environmental art. So here, this is the traditional piece that's the 1600s copper panel of animals that would live under the surface of the earth. And then here's the photo from 2009 of the working conditions for people who are mining under the surface of the earth. And I think the juxtaposition of the old and the new increases the impact, so you can still include eco-art alongside more traditional pieces that you might already have. So then the other half of the equation, the questions for the artists, are we flexible in adapting our project to different locations, including art museums? This is Mary Mattingly. So originally her project started out as the idea of symbolically pulling all her worldly belongings in a large ball wrapped in twine, just pulling it down the street behind her, and then she made the museum-ready version of this with the sculpture for the Brooklyn Museum, and then the biennial version, the large installation, that was for biennial in Havana. So she's adjusting her materials and methods to work for different locations. And this piece was compared to Sisyphus in the amount of labor it would take. Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill and it falling down the other side, and that we buy things and then they become trash and we discard them. So again and again, the pattern, we buy it, it's trash, we buy it, it's trash. And then the last questions for artists, if our work is conceptual, are we focusing enough on powerful, understandable, and evocative communication? And will our art have a long-term effect, and will it evoke change? So here's Maya Lin. Maya Lin's known for her Vietnam War Memorial. So she's calling this her last memorial. It's a memorial for biodiversity loss. So in this piece there are my pinhole camera style projections from the ground, and then visitors can hold small plexiglass panels to catch the video, so then they can, as the video comes up, they can watch it on the panel that they're holding. So this requires the interaction of the visitors, so communication. And then the videos themselves give very specific information about what species are threatened or endangered. And so she's very interested in communicating a particular message about biodiversity loss. And she also has a website as part of this project that gives very specific species from all around the world. And then my second example of an artist who's interested in communication, Bright Ugochukwu Eke. All of his work is focused around water, and most of it is specifically around acid rain in the Niger Delta region of Nigeria. This acid rain being caused by petroleum refineries in that area. So because the water is so unsafe at this point in that area from the acid rain, drinking water is sold in plastic bags. So then he references these plastic bags in a lot of his pieces, in both these. So in Shields, he uses the plastic bags to make raincoats and umbrellas as symbolic shields from the acid rain. And then in Clouds, he uses plastic bags of water that are suspended from the ceiling, like acid raindrops, and when you come up close to the piece, you can see that the water is polluted. Well, he makes it look polluted by adding graphite into the water, so when you get up close, you see that you wouldn't want that on you. And because all of his pieces focus on water, this repetition will, I think, more likely get his point across that, you know, about the situation in this particular region. So it's up to both the art museums and the eco-artists to consider different methods of including eco-art as a tool successfully in exhibits, and if accomplished effectively, co-creative effort between art museums and eco-artists can be a forward-looking and pleasurable shared responsibility. So it's up to both of them to see how they can carry this out more successfully. And thank you. And then these are all my sources, just so you can see I did my homework. And then, if anybody actually wants the links, I'd be happy to email it to you. So thank you. So, questions? Any questions?
Questions.
Yeah.
Definitely questions.
How much knowledge about the, because there's a lot of artists I haven't heard of, did you know about many of the artists who wrote?
I knew about half of them, and then I was reading, articles, but also just compilation books about these artists, and so I was familiar with about half of them. But yeah, there was a real community out there for it, and it's global. I think that's what's interesting to me too, is it's all around the world, and so it may not be as well known, but it is there. Sorry.
So I guess what's interesting to me is, I mean, all these things are social activism kinds of pieces, and so how, it seems, and I haven't seen a lot of this art, and I'm interested in this kind of art, so I don't see it come up very often in museums. So are there museums that are committed to partnering with these kinds of artists? I mean, does the Tate Modern, do certain museums have sort of a reputation for carrying this kind of an exhibition or permanent installation of this kind of art, or is this, it seems like it's not widely distributed at this point.
Yeah, one example would be the Center for Art and the Environment in Nevada, specifically focuses on that, and Paul told me about that one. And so that is their whole, that's their whole subject, is that they focus on environmental art, and eco-art sort of being one kind of environmental art, piece like land works being another kind of environmental art, so a variety of these kinds of pieces. But then I think one idea that I was interested in was that there are also museums who might just include it as part of their regular, like that wouldn't be their focus, but they would occasionally include it. And I think that's very important too, that it just come in sometimes, even if that's
such
not
great
focus.
things, really, to, elevate, climate change and, whatever the topic is. This is a great way to illustrate those points, and you would think that there'd be more interest in the museum community to bring these kinds of exhibits.
Especially because it probably, it would help bring in, audience viewers that, would bring people into the museums.
Really
It's
interesting.
It's a contemporary subject. Lindsay?
My question is, so for art, kind of like the one where the girls wear glasses at the state,
Yes.
I can see there being kind of a resistance from museums who are sponsored by large corporations like that to this kind of art. Did you see a lot of that? Maybe like attempt to kind of cover it up, or like not show those kind of exhibitions in their museums?
Like with the Tate one, that was a protest, so, I mean, they just went, they were, authorized when they just went and did it. But I did read an article about the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference, where there were museums that were going to support more activist activities, and then they ended up pulling out of it and deciding that they didn't want to be associated with it because they were afraid there would be some kind of legal issue, and so then those projects ended up being picked up by it was a local a local community center that called themselves a culture house. So those projects did get carried out. They just ended up losing their support from the museum, and that was at the Copenhagen Climate Conference. I think it was 2009. So yeah, that is an issue.
I was actually kind of the same.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, yeah, it was basically about funding, since I know a lot of these artists
Yeah.
might be funded by organizations that conflict with some of the museums you mentioned, so.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's interesting that this is one barrier to having artists take part in these shows. If they'd rather turn it down than be associated with that company. But then there are also other artists who are, fine with that. So.
I have a question for you. I wonder how much you've looked at kind of land art as a phenomenon and its relationship to museums. I know like the Dia Art Foundation manages like the Lightning Fields in Arizona
Yes.
or Spiral Jetty.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, is that a trend where we're going to see more museums that are willing to kind of put up money and help preserve some of these sites?
Actually, I feel like that would almost be like the safer kind of land art would be like the safer version of environmental art to support. So, I think also because it's like classic by now that it would be much more likely to be picked up by museums. And they do include, I'm thinking of one show that was at, it was at a university museum, and they were doing an overview of environmental art from land art until contemporary eco artists, and they included like photographs of Spiral Jetty in it. So it's
Interesting. So were there any big surprises? I know this is a topic that you're passionate about, and we've been reading all semester about this. Like, are there some takeaways for you that?
I think just the idea that it's not just up to the museums or just up to the artists, that there are things that both can improve.
Yeah.
And museums mainly having to be creative about how to include this kind of material, and then artists having to be, more practical, making sure that their art is doing something, that it's actually talking to people, and that it's actually making a change. So museums could be more creative